People say life's biggest heartbreaks come from lovers, but that's a lie. The deepest pain, the kind that cracks a soul open, comes from the people you spend your whole life searching for. I'm going to tell you a story about a millionaire who found his father not in a mansion, not in a family album, but shivering under a highway bridge, half alive, and holding a secret that could destroy everything Ethan believed. This isn't a story about money. It's about truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives even when people don't. And if you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever wondered why someone you loved walked away, or why fate put you on a path full of questions with no answers, then stay with me. Because sometimes the universe brings people back into your life not to heal the past, but to show you the truth you were never ready for before. Before we begin, if you love emotional, real-life inspired stories that touch the heart and heal the soul, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach more people who might need a story like this today. Now, let's begin. New York City always felt loudest at night. Horns, sirens, people yelling into phones they'd forget to charge. But for Ethan Cole, the city had become background noise like static on a TV he didn't have time to turn off. At 32, Ethan was what blogs called a self-made success story. Founder of a fast-growing software company, TED speaker, blue checkmarks, motivational quotes under pictures of skyline views. People loved his Instagram story, from broke college kid to millionaire CEO. What nobody knew, Ethan didn't remember his father, and his mother refused to talk about him, ever. The night it started, Ethan stood backstage at a fancy hotel ballroom in Manhattan, straightening his tie for the 100th time. "Relax, man," his business partner and best friend Marcus laughed, adjusting his own blazer. "You've done this a million times." "Yeah," Ethan said, exhaling, "just big investor crowd tonight." The stage manager poked her head in. "Ethan, you're up in 3, he nodded, clenching and unclenching his fists. He wasn't nervous about the pitch. He was nervous about the question he knew always came. "Tell us about your family." Ethan stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit him. The crowd clapped. "Good evening," he began, the practiced confidence sliding into place. "My name is Ethan Cole, CEO of BrightPath. People ask me all the time, what's my motivation? What made me work this hard?" He smiled, the one journalists called disarming. "The answer is simple," he continued. "It was just me and my mom, no trust fund, no rich uncle. My father walked out when I was a baby. We struggled a lot, and I promised myself one day I'd make enough so money would never control my life again." The audience reacted, nods, sympathetic murmurs, impressed faces. Somewhere in the ballroom, a woman in a gray coat carrying room service trays slowed as she passed the open door. She listened for a second, eyes softening. The projection on the screen behind Ethan changed, a picture of him and his mother in front of a tiny, peeling apartment door. He'd posted it on Father's Day once with the caption, "She played both roles." The crowd loved it. Somewhere far away, under a different kind of ceiling, concrete instead of chandeliers, a man sitting on cardboard near a highway overpass shivered and tried to pull his torn coat tighter. He'd never heard the speech. He didn't know his name was being dragged through spotlights and applause. He just knew that for years his heart hurt in a place money couldn't reach. After the event, after the handshakes and business cards and fake laughs, Ethan took an Uber to Brooklyn. He could afford a penthouse near Central Park. He still lived in a 2-bedroom condo and visited his mother almost every other night. When he walked into her small apartment, she was where she always was, sitting at the same old round table, a mug of tea in front of her, a crossword puzzle half done. "Hey, Mom," he called. She looked up, face lighting instantly. "There he is," she smiled. "My movie star." He laughed and kissed her forehead. "Movie star, hardly, just talked to a bunch of rich people who like slides." "You ate?" she asked automatically. "Yeah, event food," he said, flopping down in the chair across from her. "Little things on fancy bread that don't actually fill you up." She chuckled. "You sound like your father," she said without thinking. The room went quiet. They both heard it. Ethan blinked. "My what?" She looked down at her tea, regret flashing across her face. Nothing, just slip of the tongue. He leaned forward. No, Mom, you never talk about him. You said he left. You said he didn't want us, that's it, that's all I know. Her jaw tightened. And that's all you need to know. Mom, he said softly, I'm 32, I'm not a kid anymore. Don't you think I have a right to know who he was? What if there's stuff I should know, health things? She stood up abruptly and went to the sink with her cup, even though it was still half full. Your father, she said slowly, almost spitting the word, made his choice. We made ours. You're healthy. You're successful, you're happy, don't go digging up graves. He stared at her. That's not an answer. She turned, eyes shining with something between anger and fear. Ethan, please, some doors once opened can't be closed again. He wanted to push. He wanted to demand. Instead, he just nodded slowly, feeling that old, familiar emptiness in his chest. Okay, he said quietly. Good night, Mom. When he left, she sank into the chair, gripping the edge of the table, whispering to herself. I'm sorry, Jake. 2 weeks later, the storm hit. Rain hammered the streets. The city lights blurred behind streaks of water on tall glass. Ethan was driving home late from the office. Marcus had insisted they stay and finish the investor deck. Let's just get it done tonight, Marcus said. So tomorrow we're not dying. Deal, Ethan answered. By the time he finally left, it was past midnight. The freeway was nearly empty, just a few trucks and tired taxis. As Ethan approached an underpass, his headlights flashed over something on the shoulder, a shape too still to be trash. He drove past. His chest tightened. No, man, it's late, it's raining, someone else will stop. What if it's dangerous? He drove another quarter-mile, then he swore under his breath and pulled over. Damn it! He backed up slowly on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, rain smearing everything. When he got close, he saw him, a man. Maybe in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. It was hard to tell through the wet gray beard and the wrinkles. He was curled up against the concrete pillar, a thin blanket soaked through, an old army jacket clinging to him like paper. Hey, Ethan called, stepping out, the rain instantly drenching his suit. No movement, he crouched. The man's eyes were half open, unfocused. His lips were blue. Sir, Ethan asked, shaking his shoulder. Hey, can you hear me? A weak sound, more like a breath than a word. Cold, Ethan's brain flipped into decision mode. He shrugged off his own coat and draped it over the man. This was a dumb idea, he muttered to himself. But leaving you here would be worse. He pulled out his phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's a homeless man under the Jefferson overpass, exit 17. He's hypothermic or something, he's barely conscious. You need to send someone. The dispatcher took details, told him to stay if he could. Paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. They moved the man onto a stretcher. Good thing you stopped, one of them said. Another hour in this and he'd be gone. Ethan watched the ambulance doors close. What's his name? He asked. Doesn't have ID on him, a paramedic replied. They usually don't. We'll try to get something at the hospital. As the ambulance pulled away, Ethan stood there, soaked, watching red lights disappear into the wet night. Something tugged at him. He didn't know why, he just knew that walking away felt wrong. He got back into his car, turned on the heater full blast, and instead of going home, he followed the ambulance. Like antiseptic and tired coffee, Ethan waited in ugly plastic chairs as nurses hurried past. He wasn't family, he wasn't anything, yet he stayed. After a while, a nurse came over. You're the one who brought him in, she asked. Yeah, Ethan nodded. Is he okay? He's stable, she said. Severe exposure, dehydrated, but he'll make it. She paused. You his son? The question hit him in a strange way. No, Ethan said too quickly, then softer. No, I just saw him on the highway. She studied him a moment like she wanted to say more, then shrugged. You can see him for a minute, she offered. He's still out. But sometimes it helps. Ethan followed her into a small curtained-off area. The man lay there, cleaned up now in a hospital gown. His beard had been trimmed a little, his hair slicked back. An IV ran into his arm. The lines on his face seemed deeper under the harsh hospital lights. Ethan stepped closer. Something caught his eye. On the man's wrist was a worn leather bracelet, cracked and faded but still holding on. Attached to it was a tiny metal tag, scratched but legible. It said, JC 1989. Ethan felt his heart stutter. JC, his own initials were EC, but his last name, Cole, was his mother's maiden name. She'd never told him his father's last name, always dodged it. JC, he whispered. He reached out almost without thinking and brushed his fingers over the tag. The man's eyes flew open. Ethan jumped. The man stared at him, confused at first, then something like recognition flickered in his gaze. Ethan, the man rasped. Ethan's blood ran cold. How do you know my name? The man's lips trembled. Your eyes, he whispered. God, they're the same. For days after that, Ethan couldn't focus. Marcus noticed. You good man? He asked during a meeting when Ethan kept zoning out while a designer pitched a new app interface. Yeah, Ethan said, sorry. Just didn't sleep great. He woke up at 3 a.m. replaying Jacob's words. He saw his mother's face when she said, some doors can't be closed again. Finally, he did something he didn't know how to do well. He went to see his mother and told her the truth. They sat in the kitchen, same table, same mugs. I found him, he said quietly. Her hand froze around her spoon. Who? She said, but her voice already knew. Jacob, Ethan replied. Jacob Carter under a highway bridge, half dead. Her face went pale. Is he alive? She whispered. Yeah, Ethan nodded. For now. She looked down at her lap, fingers trembling. I told him you'd never forgive him, she whispered. I told him if he loved you, the best thing he could do was vanish. Tears stung Ethan's eyes. You knew he was out there, he said. Homeless, and you never told me. She looked up, eyes blazing, hurt and defensive. And what would you have done, Ethan? She asked. You were 8, 15, 20. You would have gone looking for him. You would have brought his chaos back into our lives. I spent years building a quiet, safe place for you. I wasn't going to let his mistakes burn it down again. He swallowed. People change. Some do, she answered. Some don't, but the memory of being left, of being told this is for your own good while you feel your heart ripping out, that doesn't change. Silence. It was the first time Ethan saw his mother not as the strong, unbreakable hero of his childhood, but as a woman, one who'd been young and scared and in love with a man who'd walked into the night. I'm not asking you to forgive him, Ethan said quietly. I don't even know if I can. I can't stop thinking about him under that bridge. That could have been me if a few things went different, if Bright Path failed. If investors said no. He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo he'd taken at the hospital, Jacob asleep, the leather bracelet visible. He still wears this, Ethan said, 30+ years. Her face crumpled. She reached out, fingers brushing the image of the bracelet like she could feel the leather. My birthday gift, she whispered. I made it from your dad's old belt. We were so broke we thought it was funny. A choked sound escaped her throat. He never took it off, even when we fought. For the first time, Ethan saw a tiny piece of the story from another angle, not pure abandonment, not just cruelty, but fear, stupidity, desperation, cowardice, ugly human things. Ethan visited Jacob again. This time he didn't stand at the edge of the bed. He pulled up a chair. Jacob looked surprised and embarrassed when he saw him. You came back, he said. Yeah, Ethan answered. Don't read too much into it. I'm just not great at leaving people under bridges, apparently. Jacob smiled weakly. There's humor, that's something. Ethan exhaled slowly. The hospital says when they discharge you, you'll go back to the shelter, he said. If there's space, if not, well, you know. Jacob looked down, ashamed. I've managed under worse, he muttered. Well, you're not going back under a freeway, Ethan said firmly. Jacob frowned. What? I rented you a room month to month, tiny. Barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, but the door locks, the roof doesn't leak, and it's close to a clinic and a soup kitchen. Jacob stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that? He whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. Because a stranger stopped for you, he said, and I happen to be the stranger's son. He looked away, eyes glinting. And because if I walk away knowing my father is sleeping on concrete while I have heated floors, I'm not sure I'll like the man in the mirror. Jacob's eyes flooded. I don't deserve this, he choked. Probably not, Ethan said frankly, but I'm not doing it because you deserve it, I'm doing it because I can. Word got around, first inside the company, then on social media. Someone at the hospital had recognized Ethan, the startup millionaire, from that video. A nurse had posted anonymously about how he'd stayed with a homeless man he barely knew. Then, a shelter volunteer wrote a blog about how Ethan was paying for a few emergency beds that month in honor of someone from his past. By the time a local journalist called, the story had twisted itself into something shiny. Tech millionaire secretly helping homeless man, and you won't believe who he is. Ethan hated that headline. Marcus waved the tablet. Bro, this is PR gold, he said. You know how many founders get called out for being heartless? You actually did something decent and they found out. Let them. Ethan shook his head. It's not a redemption story, he muttered. I didn't sin. I just used a credit card. The full story that the homeless man was his father hadn't come out yet. That changed when one persistent journalist, a woman named Dana Wells, did what good journalists do. She connected dots. One day she showed up at BrightPath, waited politely in the lobby, and when Ethan finally agreed to speak to her off the record, she laid it out. Mr. Cole, she said, flipping her notebook. The man you helped, Jacob Carter, served in the Army. He was injured in a factory accident later. He had a missing persons report filed by a woman named Linda Cole 32 years ago. She withdrew it a month later. Ethan's chest tightened. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I'm going to run this story, she said gently, and if I don't include the truth, someone else will twist it. Right now, you're a local hero. When they find out the man you helped is your father, they'll repaint the whole thing. Rich son rescues poor dad. People love that narrative. It's neat, simple. It's not neat, Ethan snapped. It's messy as hell. I figured, Dana replied, which is why I'm giving you a chance. You can comment, or you can stay silent and let the world decide what this means without your voice. He stared at her for a long time. Then he said something he didn't expect. Fine, he sighed, let's talk. The headline, when it came out, was less dramatic than he feared. He built an app that helped millions, then found his father under a bridge. The story didn't paint Ethan as perfect. It didn't paint Jacob as a saint or a villain. It just told the truth. It talked about debt and fear, about a young couple crushed between hospital bills and bad decisions. It talked about a boy who grew up believing he'd been abandoned, and a man who lived with the weight of that belief on his shoulders every night under flickering streetlights. The internet reacted the way it always did, loudly. Some comments were harsh. So dad disappears and now wants in because the kid is rich? Lol. Once a deadbeat, always a deadbeat. Others were kinder. People don't realize how one injury or bad decision can spiral into homelessness. Proud of Ethan for helping even if he owes that man nothing. Maybe forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about healing yourself. Donation links to the shelter crashed from traffic. BrightPath saw a spike in users. Some investors praised him for authentic branding. Ethan ignored most of it. What mattered was smaller. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number Marcus had helped set up for Jacob. Jacob, I read the article, didn't deserve your kindness in it, but I'm grateful. Ethan stared at the screen for a while, then typed back, ETHAN. We're not even close to okay, but we're not under a bridge either. That's a start. Months passed. Jacob stayed in the tiny room Ethan had rented. He started going to support groups. Met a counselor who specialized in trauma and homelessness, got on a wait list for a job training program. He still walked with a slight limp, still had days where shame pressed so hard on his chest he could barely breathe. But he also had a bed, a hot plate, and a battered second-hand TV. And sometimes Ethan. They weren't father and son. Not yet, more like two men sitting on opposite sides of a river trying to decide if it was worth building a bridge or just waving from afar. One spring afternoon, Ethan texted Jacob, ETHAN, Mom wants to see you. Dinner. My place, Sunday, 6 p.m. Can you handle that? The reply took a long time. Jacob, I don't deserve her forgiveness or yours, but if she's willing to be in the same room, I'll be there, even if she throws the food at me. Sunday came. Ethan paced his living room, adjusting napkins like they were life or death. He'd cooked badly. There was too much salt on the chicken and the mashed potatoes were slightly lumpy, but it felt important that for once he was the one doing the providing. The doorbell rang. His mother stood there, small and tense, wearing her nicest blouse like armor. "You look handsome," she said, forcing a smile. "You look like you're about to testify in court," he replied gently. She swatted his arm. "Don't make me laugh," she scolded. "I'm trying to stay angry." A second knock. They both froze. Ethan opened the door. Jacob stood there wearing a second-hand button-up shirt and pants that actually fit. His hair was combed. He held a cheap bouquet of grocery store flowers like it was a shield. "Hey," he said quietly. Ethan stepped aside. His mother and Jacob looked at each other for the first time in more than 30 years. Time fell away. For a second, Ethan saw them not as they were now, older, tired, carved out by time, but as that young couple in the photo he'd once found. "Hi, Linda," Jacob whispered. Her lips trembled. "I should slam the door," she said. He nodded. "You should." She didn't. Instead, she reached out, fingers shaking, and slapped his arm. "That's for leaving," she said, voice breaking. He nodded, eyes wet. "I know." She slapped him again, weaker. "That's for making me the bad guy to our son." He winced. "Understood." Then, to Ethan's horror and awe, she grabbed the front of Jacob's shirt and pulled him into a shaky hug, sobbing into his chest. "And that," she choked, "is because I thought you were dead on the street somewhere for 30 years. He wrapped his arms around her like a man holding onto a life raft. "I almost was," he whispered into her hair. "More times than I can count. I'm so sorry." Ethan looked away, swallowing hard. He felt something unclench in his own chest. Something he didn't know he'd been holding since he was old enough to ask, "Where's my dad?" Dinner was awkward. There were long silences. Jacob kept putting his fork down like he wasn't used to eating at a table. Ethan's mother corrected his posture once, out of habit, then laughed at herself and cried again. Halfway through, Ethan cleared his throat. "So," he said, "what now?" Jacob looked at him, then at Linda. "That depends on you," Jacob said. "Both of you. I don't expect holidays or birthdays or a chair at the head of any table. I'm just grateful I got a chance to say I'm sorry before I die." "Stop talking like that," Linda snapped automatically. "You're not dying, you're just old and dramatic." He smiled. "Always loved that mouth," he murmured. She rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched. Ethan set down his fork. "I can't rewrite my childhood," he said. "I can't forget the Father's Day events where I stood alone in the corner, the forms that said Father's name. And I had to leave it blank. I can't erase the anger." Jacob nodded, tearing up. "I wouldn't ask you to," he said. "But," Ethan continued, "I also can't forget the man on the highway. The way you said my name in that hospital like you'd been carrying it for years, the bracelet, the scar, the story." He exhaled. "So here's what I can offer. I can't call you Dad, not yet, maybe not ever, but I can call you Jacob. I can help you get back on your feet, not because you earned it, but because I'm tired of letting a man under a bridge control my feelings without ever letting him stand in the light." Jacob blinked hard. "That's more than I deserve," he whispered. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Maybe, but I'm not doing it for you," he said honestly. "I'm doing it for me, for the kid who wanted answers. For the man who doesn't want to spend the rest of his life hating a ghost." His mother reached across the table and took both their hands. "You're both idiots," she sniffed. "But you're my idiots." They laughed, wet and shaky. For the first time, the sound didn't feel like it belonged to just two people. It felt like three. Months turned into a year. Jacob completed a basic job training program. He started working part-time at a nonprofit that helped other homeless vets transition off the street. He wasn't a millionaire, he never would be. He lived in a small studio apartment that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. On the wall, he'd taped a newspaper clipping of Dana's article, not for the part about Ethan's success, but for the sentence near the end. "Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't building an empire, it's walking back into the life you broke and asking if there's still a chair at the table." Ethan visited once a week. Sometimes they just watched basketball, arguing over bad calls. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes Jacob told stories about Ethan's grandparents, people he'd never met. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Ethan asked, "Did you know any of this? That I'd end up here?" He gestured vaguely at the world, success, money, headlines. Jacob chuckled. "When your mom told me she was pregnant," he said, "I was terrified, but I also had this weird, unshakable feeling. Like this kid was going to be bigger than anything I could imagine, not just money, just heart, strength, stubbornness. Guess I was right about at least one thing." Ethan smiled, quietly proud. "I used to tell people I was self-made," he said, "like I just sprang into the world alone with a laptop and hustle." Jacob shook his head. "No one is self-made," he said gently. "You had a mother who skipped meals so you could eat. You had teachers who stayed late to explain things. You had friends, mentors, and somewhere in the background you had a dumb, scared young man who loved you so much he thought walking away would save you." He swallowed. "I got it wrong in 1,000 ways, but the love was real." Ethan's throat tightened. They stopped at a bench. For the first time, Ethan said the word out loud, not as an accusation, but as something like a possibility. "Dad," he said slowly. Jacob's head snapped toward him, eyes wide. What did you say?" he whispered. Ethan looked straight ahead, blinking away the burn behind his eyes. "I said," he repeated, a small smile tugging at his lips, "that if you're gonna keep giving me bad advice and yelling at the TV during games, I might as well call you what you are." Jacob's hands shook. He reached up, touching his cheek like he was checking if he was awake. I don't know what to do with that," he said, voice cracking. Ethan shrugged, tears finally spilling. "Just don't disappear this time," he said softly. "I won't," Jacob replied, gripping the old leather bracelet on his wrist. "Not unless you make me," Ethan laughed wetly. "No promises." They sat there, a millionaire and the man who had nothing in his pockets for years. People passed them, some in suits, some in scrubs, some pushing strollers, some with shopping bags. Nobody knew their story. But for Ethan, it was simple. This wasn't a story about a homeless man who turned out to be a millionaire's dad. It was a story about a son who refused to let hate be the final chapter, and a father who finally walked out of the shadows, not as a ghost, not as a headline, but as a flawed human being trying to make the most of whatever time was left. The city was still loud, the traffic still roared, but there, on that park bench, it felt strangely quiet. Like after years of noise, the universe had finally paused long enough for a father and son to hear each other breathe.